There we go. Okay, am I using the right thing? Now I'm using the right microphone. And I think we are ready, right? No, Heather's just letting things go. Yep, now we're good. Okay, so you both are we live? We're live.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. Good morning, committee. I'm going to call this meeting to order of the Joint Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs Committee. We have some bills to consider this morning. Before we do that, just a couple of comments. First of all, it's great to see everybody. I hope you had a good holiday and you're off to a good start with the new year. Some of us, Senator McCune, were up early and ready to go for this meeting, by golly, and it's good to see your smiling face. Senator Anderson, glad to see you. I haven't seen you in a while, and all the rest of the committee, I just want to say how much of a pleasure it's been to work throughout this interim. We're going to finish up our work today. As you remember, late in the interim, late last year, we had reports from the military department. Based on those reports and based on testimony that we received, we have drafted these three bills that will be in front of us today. Before we get into the agenda, I want to thank those of you who have reached out to me with get well wishes, and I feel like I'm on the comeback trail. So really appreciate your good thoughts, and I especially want to thank the co-chairman who was driving the team and wagon, and I was kind of like the Dalmatian dog who was just sitting up on top for a little while, trying to get healed up. So anyway, let's get started. Heather, would you please call the roll this morning?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Senator Anderson,
Here.
Senator Furphy,
Here.
Senator McEwen,
Here.
Senator Pappas,
Excused?
Representative Baker,
Here.
Representative Brown.
Here.
I'm sorry, Representative Brown,
Here.
Representative Burt,
Here.
Representative Henderson,
Here.
Representative McGuire,
Present.
Representative Obermueller,
Here.
Representative O'Hearn,
Here.
Representative Stivar,
Present.
Chairman Landon,
Here.
Co-Chairman Burkhart.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Heather. Mr. Co-Chairman, before we get started with the bills this morning, any opening remarks from you?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Just one quick one. I know some people wanted some other things considered during this committee meeting, but the co-chairman and I decided that we should just stick to what we had set up originally. We have an interim coming up again, and we can address some of those issues. They were not real critical to the work we were doing already. So that was a reason why we are sticking to these three bills, only these bills, for discussion, and hopefully we get through them quickly. Having an additional meeting can create some problems, and I think just by handling just these bills, we avoid those. So thanks, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you again, Mr. Co-Chairman, for your work over the holidays to get these bills ready to go for our consideration this morning. Let's move into that. Unless the committee has anything before we do so. Let's take up the bill drafts this morning, and Heather, if you would please walk us through LSO 0300 working draft 0.5, and we'll get started. We have guests this morning who I think will be ready to help us with these bills as well. So
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think you will see if the chair or General Porter and Mr. Smith are in the same little window in the Zoom. And actually, Chairman Porter, or sorry, General Porter was just replaced by Mr. Smith. And so I know that he will have things to say about the bill draft as I'm presenting it as well.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Take it away.
Okay, so this is 22 LSO-0300 Working Draft 0.5. And this bill draft is to require an annual report that is laid out in the bill. And this annual report that's laid out is we pulled the elements from the report that the military department gave the committee at the meeting at the end of November. So it creates a new section in Title 19. Title 19 is the military title. And Section 7-103, but it creates a new subsection C. And this is in the duties of the Adjutant General. And so the new subsection C begins on page 2. And it just describes that not later than October 31st of each year, the Adjutant General shall report to the Governor and the Joint Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs Interim Committee on sexual harassment, discrimination, and sexual assault matters. The report shall include at a minimum the following information for the fiscal year preceding the report, presented in a manner to avoid identification of individual persons. And then these next paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, they are the ones that pull out the basically the description of the report that the military department presented to the committee in November. So for number 1 is, military department demographics, including the number of state and federal employees, civilian and military employees, full and part-time Air National Guard members, full and part-time Army National Guard members, and the gender of those members and employees. And then paragraph 2 says that this report shall also include statistical information on all incidents, reports, and formal and informal complaints of sexual harassment, discrimination, and sexual assault, including, and this breaks that stuff down just a little bit, the way it was broken down in the report that they had given the committee. So the subparagraph A, trends regarding position levels or status of reporting persons and persons named in reports and locations and the locations of the incidents. So levels, status, and locations of incidents, but again, de-identified to not reveal any individual. And then subparagraph B at the top of page 3, that would also be broken down to incident dates, details, and actions taken as allowed under privacy laws. So then paragraph 3, an additional element of the report will be changes in options for employees and members to report incidents of sexual harassment, discrimination, or sexual assault. This was labeled this way because they had given the committee, they had responded to the committee about what the different options for reporting are. And so any changes to those rather than repeating the reporting options every single year. And then paragraph 4, results and comparative results from previous years, external assessments, internal assessments, unit climate surveys, or unit sensing sessions. If you remember in November, part of their report presented the results of all these different surveys that they had been doing, and both internal and external. So that's any surveys that have been done each year, those would be a part of the report. And then finally, assessments, analysis, policies and procedures implemented in response to incidents of sexual harassment, discrimination, or sexual assault, and required annual trainings, corrective action plans, and recommendations for legislative or other actions. So this is just putting it, this is the committee directive to say, hey, that report that we got, let's make that annual. That's what this bill does.
Heather, thank you. Committee, any questions of Heather before we go to any comments for Mr. Smith? By way of just any further explanation of the bill, Mr. Smith, good morning, by the way. Thank you for being here. Would appreciate any thoughts you might have on the draft of this bill. I know you worked with the crew to get it ready to go.
Mr. Chairman, good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. Yeah, this bill is fairly simple. We really just tried to replicate what we did this year to put it into statute so that continuing on, the committee would always be able to hear from us as the military department on these issues. Really, the only question mark we had as we went through the bill was to when to make the report available. As you all know, the federal fiscal year ends 30 September. So we put it on page 2 on line 1, October 31st. It's kind of a quick turn since almost all of our reporting is done on the federal fiscal year. But we also were mindful of the committee's typical schedule where they try to have the third meeting either in late October, early November at the latest. So we wanted the report available before that final typical joint transportation meeting. So that was really the only sticking point, so to speak. And we basically came to that compromise to get the report to the governor and the committee at that time. And really beyond that, sir, it just really replicates, as Heather said, what we did this year. And we certainly, I stand for questions of the committee about what this report would look like and anything that you believe is not clear.
Mr. Smith, thank you. Committee, any questions that you might have of legal counsel, Mr. Smith, this morning regarding draft 0300?
Mr. Chairman.
0.5. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Smith, I don't want to call you Chris, so we'll do retired Colonel Smith. Just curiosity, what kind of time frame, what kind of man hours are put into this report? How much does this? I know you guys already done it once, but if we're looking at doing this on an annual basis, what kind of man time are we looking at putting this report together for all of
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I guess I didn't really formally introduce myself. I'm Chris Smith, Senior Counsel for the Wyoming Military Department. In answer to Representative Brown's question, we already do a lot of what then becomes this report. So we've talked a lot about the DOC survey that we've been doing almost annually. It's supposed to be every 2 years, but lately we've done it 2 years in a row. That going through the DOC survey results is literally probably hundreds of man hours to distill it down into the individual units, try to assess what's going on, read through what really can be thousands, well, at least hundreds of comments specific. So that whole process that leads to the report is probably hundreds of hours. Actually putting the report together, because we already do all these other sensing sessions and surveys, really it takes maybe 100 hours. I'm looking at General Porter. You know, we have so many people working on bits and pieces of it that it isn't like one person, it's full-time job for a couple of months. So it's, I'll say, about 100 hours to gather all that data and put into a report form.
Representative Brown, follow up? Okay, good question. Thank you. Committee, anything else for
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Representative Obermuller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 2, I just want to ask the Colonel on line 16. Would this bill be improved by dropping the word statistical information and just start with information? This doesn't seem like the sample size is big enough to really draw valid statistical conclusions. Would it improve the reporting process by dropping that term? Thank you.
Mr. Porter? Or rather, Mr. Smith, my mistake?
Well, I show up as Greg Porter, so. So Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, when we say statistical information, we really mean factual information. As you know, we're trying really hard not to violate any privacy interests of the individuals involved. But you are right, the sample size is always too small to do any true statistical analysis. I mean, when you're talking about hopefully no more than a handful of sexual assaults at any given year, if that, there really isn't a lot of actual statistical analysis as is meant by that phrase. When we said statistical information, we were just trying to get to keeping it to the limited facts outside of, like gender and where it happened, outside of names and actual details of the incident. So we probably could use a different word. That's what we meant by using this word.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Colonel. And thank you, Representative. Committee, Heather, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stivar is here in the room and he has a question or a comment or something.
Thank you very much, Heather. Representative, I cannot see you. There is the panel that wherein you sit. So Representative, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, is this going to cover Inspector General complaints, congressional complaints in this report?
Mr. Smith.
Chairman Landon, Representative Stiver, it does not specifically include those, no. So one of the problems I will comment in terms of IG investigations, if there is a substantiated IG complaint, so if somebody's filed a complaint with the IG, it's substantiated and the IG gives it to command for action, the command would know about it. If someone files an IG complaint, it's considered confidential to the IG, and we really don't always find out about them unless something is substantiated or unless there's a major investigation going on within our ranks. So in answer to your question, no, it does not include IG and congressionals. We do track congressional inquiries. We certainly could add that, a page on, talking about the congressional inquiries. We could talk about any substantiated IG complaints, but other than that, we wouldn't necessarily know what IG complaints are out there.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Follow-up, Representative Stivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, on these complaints, I know you know, but the hostile work environments that are created within the command, some are substantiated, some ain't. Will they be part of the report we get?
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Stivar, if they were part of a sexual harassment or discrimination complaint, hostile work environment can mean a lot of things. Typically, we track those as part of discrimination, a form of discrimination. So they would be included as part of this report if the individual filed an actual complaint about it. There are times when within the unit, somebody will say they feel like they're not being treated fairly or there's a hostile environment. Sometimes within that unit, they'll take care of it internal at the lower level. And so if some kind of written complaint is not actually filed, if a written complaint's filed and we know about it, we will include it in the report. But some people claim hostile work environment within their unit and the unit takes care of it. Those we don't necessarily track because we trust the unit commanders and below to take care of the issue at that lowest level.
Representative Stivar.
I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Representative. Committee, any other questions of either Heather or the Colonel or even the co-chairman who worked on this draft?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, on page 2, line 20, it's referring to names of people. If you could give me just a few words on what the limitations are relative to, incidents and, the naming of people involved in those incidents relative to reporting. Please, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Henderson, I'm trying to remember our discussion on this paragraph. Generally speaking, we don't use the names of people in our reports. That's a Privacy Act. We've talked a lot about the Privacy Act. It's 5 USC 553A. It's federal law that says we cannot share personal information without a written consent from the people involved. So our intent with this was talking about trends and position levels or status of people reporting or people named, not to name the people, but to talk about their status in their positions. So if there was a sexual assault in one of our facilities, and the supervisor, who was, say, a master sergeant and a young airman, were the people involved, we would track it was, say, an airman and a master sergeant was the perpetrator, but we wouldn't use the names. Does that make sense? So the trends would just be the levels and status of the people who reported or were named, not their actual names.
Follow up, sir.
Representative Henderson, go ahead.
Thank you. That makes it much clearer. And so am I correct to understand that it would be referred to as, say, like a position? You mentioned the sergeant, the supervisor, subordinate kind of thing. Correct?
Mr.
Yeah,
Smith, go ahead.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, Representative Henry, that's right. The idea was we'd be looking at those relationships, not the names of the people.
That's a good question, Representative. That's something that if this bill moves forward, we may have colleagues ask us about that. So good question. Committee, anything else from the presenters of the bill? If not, Heather, I'd like to, if there's nothing else from the committee, let's go to public
Oh,
comment.
sorry, Mr. Chairman, there is something. Representative Stivar has another question.
Okay, Representative Stivart, thank you for your indulgence. I am not able to see you on the screen, so please take it away.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Smith, the difference between EO and the SAPA, or the SAPR, how does this correlate between them two?
Mr. Smith, if as you ponder the question from Representative Stivar, can you help me out a little bit? Some of our former military guys know some of these acronyms that I'm not up to speed on. So there were a lot of letters thrown in there.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in Representative Stivar. EO is equal opportunity. So basically, we're usually talking equal employment opportunity. EO is what we typically call it on the military side. EEO, equal employment opportunity, is what we usually call it on the civilian side. SAPR is the sexual assault prevention and response program. And we have SARCs, sexual assault response coordinators. We have one full-time on the Army, one full-time on the air. They run the SAPR program, and that is the program where people who have been victims of sexual assault can go determine if they want a restricted report or an unrestricted report and get counseling help and referrals. It is our robust program to help sexual assault victims. So the SAPR program is about sexual assault victims. The EO program, or EEO program, depending on military or civilian, is about employment discrimination, employment reprisal, and employment related things, not sexual assault, not victims of crimes.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That's helpful. Representative Stivar, do you have a follow-up to that?
No follow-up, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Co-Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Just for the committee, and just to reiterate one thing we had discussed at the November meeting, or December, whenever that was, there is a difference between sexual discrimination and sexual assault, with sexual assault being a criminal activity that is turned over to law enforcement. That's a crime, and it is handled as a crime. So, and we've not, my recollection is we've not had any of those in recent memory. So just a clarification for the committee, that when we talk about those, that sexual assault is generally handled a little different than harassment or discrimination, due to the fact that it is a criminal action.
Thank you for that, Co-Chairman. Heather, I'm going to go to you to ask if there's anyone who would like to provide any public comment on this bill.
Mr. Chairman, it does not, there's nobody here in the room, and there is nobody in the queue online.
Okay. I'm going to close public comment on 0300 Working Draft Point 5. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill?
The bill.
My apologies, who moved that? Thank you, Representative Henderson. Moved by Henderson. Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative O'Hearn. Committee, let's work the bill. Is there any comment or suggested amendments on page 1? On over to the new language on page 2.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Overmuller.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On line 16, I would like to change the word statistical to factual. The reason for this is just looking at if we pass this bill and next October, we're looking at the reports. I want to be seeing the facts that are out there. I don't want to see that there was 100% increase when it was 1 last year and 2 this year. Statistics, when you have such a small pool, can be very misleading and distracting. So I would like the reports to be to zero in on the factual elements of this only, and that's why I'm asking to change the word statistical on line 16. The amendment would be to change statistical to factual. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I have a second from Representative Henderson. Discussion. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Representative Overmuller's amendment to line 16 on page 2, please raise your hand to the screen. Okay. Anyone opposed? That amendment passes. We are back on the bill. Committee, anything else on page 2? I would say this. I've read line 20 through 22 a couple of times since our discussion this morning. And let's be aware of that. Some good questions asked during our discussion, and that may come up during this session. So let's be aware of that language and just make sure it is where we need it to be, and that we're able to defend it on the floor. Anything else on page 2? Page 3. Anything on page 3?
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Stivar.
Yeah, line 6, I'd like to add IG and congressional complaints within that. There after sexual assault with comma IG and congressionals.
Okay, Representative Stivar, could you help me one more time where you're suggesting that we
Line
add that
6, after the reporting instances of sexual harassment, discrimination, and sexual assault, comma, IG or Inspector General complaints and congressional. And, you know, a lot of the IG complaints that unless it goes up higher, are taken care of at the local level. It's the ones that go up higher that I think we need to know about. And if there's a congressional complaint, it comes through and they can let us know how many troops and people have called and put a congressional on them. Not the outcome, how many that were there within that report.
Representative Stivar, I will ask if we have a second to that proposed amendment. Do we have a second for the proposed amendment? Senator McEwen seconded that. Okay, Heather, let's go to you first.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stivar, I just wanted to clarify, one, what IG, that's Inspector General, right? And then 2, I just wondered, that particular line 6 is about just options for reporting. And I think that I was hearing that the request is to report actual reports. And so I just wonder if it might possibly go on page 2, line Oh, I'm sorry. If it might be a C, like after line 2 on page, so let me back up. On page 2, you'll note that paragraph 2 says or factual information, including all incidents and reports and things. And then it has an A, and then at the top of page 3, there's a B. I wonder if this maybe should be more, it would be more, it seems like it would make more sense as a sub paragraph C, to include those Inspector General and congressional complaints. The only reason is that paragraph 3, that's just about like kind of procedures for reporting. Yeah.
That works
Heather,
for you.
Would that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
That does make sense. And so committee, if the bringer of the amendment and the second are good with it, let's consider this proposed amendment as being a subparagraph C, which would come in on line 3 on page 3. Is everybody up to speed on what we might be doing there? Representative O'Hearn.
I agree with that, our Chairman Blandon.
Okay. Mr. Smith, you thoughts on this? Please feel free to weigh in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to clarify, if we're going to put it under a subparagraph C, that would still be only those complaints that are related to sexual harassment, discrimination, and sexual assault, I assume. The reason I ask is we have congressional inquiries all the time. The vast majority of them involve pay disputes, pay issues, delayed pay. Really don't want to put those in the report. So, but if they're Inspector General and congressional complaints concerning sexual harassment, discrimination, and sexual assault, that's fine. That is not a overly burdensome provision.
Mr. Smith, thank you for that. And I think if you go back to line 16 on page 2, I think that is the limiting language in the statute, which would pinpoint which one of those IG or congressional issues would come into play. But Heather, you had your hand up.
I put it back down when you said the exact thing that I was going to say, Mr. Chairman.
I didn't mean to take those words out of your mouth, Heather. So
I'm glad you did.
okay. Committee, are we good with where this language would wind up? Further discussion. Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would ask if the bringer of the amendment would want to modify it to include those complaints that are known to the department. Mr. Smith previously indicated that they may not know of all of them, and just make a modification that they report those that are known. They can't report ones that are unknown.
So, Mr. Chairman, that would simply require some language stating any IG complaints or congressional complaints known by the department?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So, Representative Stivar, are you following that suggestion? And my sense is that we could maybe allow for Heather to wordsmith that a little bit to include that consideration made by the co-chairman, which is we have to know about them before we can report them.
I'm going to agree with that. And I think what Heather's got written looks good.
Okay, Heather, can you catch the committee up on what your thoughts are there?
So, Mr. Chairman, I think the way that this amendment has evolved is that page 3, after line 2, we would insert a subparagraph C that says Inspector General and congressional complaints known to the department.
Boy, that's just what the co-chairman was thinking, I believe. Committee, does everybody understand that? The bringer of the amendment, are we good with that? And is the second good with that? Any concerns?
I'm good with
Okay.
this, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, you have numerous people with their hands up.
I am going to get to Senator Anderson, and then we'll go to Representative Brown. So, Senator Anderson.
I'm just curious how we're going to explain the wording that it's known. If it's not known, they're certainly not going to report on it. So it's kind of a repeat of obvious information, I think, but I'm okay with the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Good point. Representative Brown?
Mr. Chairman, the language that was used by the military department earlier, and kind of, I think what Chairman Burkhart was trying to get at, was substantiated claims. At the point of these claims that come through, there's a lot of them that are not known because they're not substantiated and they do not have the information that comes back to them through the channels. A lot of them are inspected, and then if there's not substantiation to them, they're not given the information. So it might be worth it, if we're going to be talking military lingo and putting military lingo into statute here, might be worth it to put in substantiated claims as opposed to known to. And I think that also gets to what Senator Anderson is saying as well. Substantiated claims may be the more appropriate language for the statute.
Good points made. Mr. Smith, I want to go back to you on this. What are your thoughts regarding substantiated claims, et cetera?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate what Representative Brown is talking about. In the Inspector General process in particular, a lot of people we want people to go to the Inspector General with their questions and concerns. A lot of them don't give rise to an actual complaint. A lot of those aren't investigated, and then the command, the military department, doesn't find out about them. I was just talking to General Porter. I don't think we have a problem with saying known because that is a slightly broader group than just the substantiated ones, because some of the unsubstantiated ones we find out about because there's processes we need to improve, stuff like that. So I'm okay with saying known. I think that limits it. We can only tell you what we know about. If we know about it, we'll tell you about it, I guess is what I'm coming down to.
Okay, that's helpful, Mr. Smith. I appreciate Senator Anderson and Representative Brown. We can keep an eye on that language, gentlemen, and if this bill moves forward, we'll see how that might evolve, or we can revisit when we get to a committee. But committee, anything else on the amendment? Anything else? Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one quick question, and probably Colonel Smith probably will answer a lot better. Knowing that we're looking at the Inspector General as well as congressional complaints, is the 1 month after the fiscal year to where the report should be done going to be enough time to get all that information from those two entities? I know usually reporting processes and requesting information can take some time.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burke, great question. I think we're okay, because if we know we have to report about them, we'll just keep track of them as they come in over the year. So I think it's just a matter of tabulating them. And in all honesty, IG complaints and congressional complaints involving sexual harassment, discrimination, sexual assault, excuse me for whistling, they're very few. That's not the avenue those kinds of cases typically run in. So I don't think it'll be a problem keeping track to make the report deadline.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Representative Burt, are you good?
I am, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Committee, I think I sense that we're ready to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of Representative Stivar's amendment, line 3, page 3, please raise your hand to the screen. Okay, any opposed? That amendment passes. We are back on the bill. Anything else, committee, on page 3? Anything else on page 3? Okay. Heather, would you please call the roll on 0300 working draft .5?
Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
Excused?
Representative Baker,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Burt,
Aye.
Representative Henderson,
Aye.
Representative McGuire,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Burkhart,
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Aye.
That passes.
Okay. That is a
Mr.
Senate
Chairman?
bill. Heather, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, Senate or House bill?
I was just going to say that we'll be glad to take this one on the Senate side. If that meets with your approval, Mr. Co-Chairman, otherwise we can arm wrestle for it.
No, you can have it.
Okay. All right, Heather, that's a Senate bill. Let's keep moving this morning, committee. Let's go to LSO 0299, working draft .5, criminal record dissemination, military department. And Heather, if you would take us away on this one. Again, I appreciate Mr. Smith being alongside, and Mr. Co-Chairman, feel free to jump in at any point. So Heather, take it away.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. This is going through Bill Draft 22 LSO-0299, Working Draft 0.5.
Let me just, my apologies, Heather. I think I got out of order. The agenda actually calls for us to take up 302 first.
Okay.
Military department discrimination or harassment grievances. In the interest of staying with the agenda, let's go to 302, working draft .8. My apologies.
Okay.
So let's stick with the agenda. My fault. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you said, this is 302, working draft 0.8. This bill draft is, it relates to the discrimination and harassment grievances involving the Wyoming National Guard or military department. This is the bill draft that the committee in November said, let's coordinate with an agency outside of the military department. And just a tiny piece of information for the committee. At the committee time in November, there was discussion that perhaps that the other agency would be A&I. However, as we investigated and looked further into statute and to what's already being done out there and who's already doing this, it's actually the Department of Workforce Services. So the committee, where if there were folks looking for the terms A&I, they would actually be seeing Workforce Services. And in fact, those are a couple people who are on the call today. So moving back into the title on page 1, that it's providing the Wyoming Military Department processes for reporting discrimination and sexual harassment. And to be clear, these already existed. What this bill does is it clarifies that, you know, when one comes in and how there's coordination between the Department of Workforce Services and the military department. And so this bill draft specifies duties and powers of both the Department of Workforce Services and the Adjutant General. And then the committee back in November had also said that it wanted to authorize a position and funds for the Department of Workforce Services to do this coordination with the military department. So that's the title encompasses all that. And moving to page 2, the bill draft. And actually, since this is the very first thing that's going to come up, the committee also wanted to have make it be confirmed and clear that there was some discussion of that Uniform Code of Military Justice Article 138 process, and that would be an additional avenue of reporting available to people. So that's what because this is creating a new section, and creating sections are always first in bill drafts. That's why we are looking at section 1 on page 2 with a newly created 19-9-404. And so this is in in the statutes, remember Title 19 are the military statutes. And then in Title 19, Chapter 9 is the Wyoming National Guard, because that's who this would apply to as far as the sort of the similar procedure to the Article 138 UCMJ process. So it has 19-9-404 created. And so this indicates this basically, what you'll see on page 2, lines 6 through 17, more or less mirrors the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, Article 138 procedure, only applicable to the Wyoming National Guard. So that's what you'll see on lines 6 through 17. And then you'll see the staff comment that begins at the bottom of page 2 and carries over to the top of page 3, that just shows you, for illustrative purposes and to be able to compare them, how that is essentially the Article 138 from the UCMJ, but altered to be applicable to the Wyoming National Guard.
So
Then-
Heather, let me stop you right there. Thank you for that. That's an excellent description of what takes place on page 2. And the reference to the staff comment. I wanted to stop you to offer to the committee any opportunity that you have any questions thus far on that one. I think this is one of the key parts of the bill. If there are no questions, please proceed, Heather. Thank you.
Okay. And I didn't want to stop Mr. Smith from speaking to that section before we move to section 2.
We will certainly, Heather, come back to Mr. Smith.
Okay.
I'll let you keep going. I just wanted to make sure that the committee understood what we were doing to parallel those languages. So go ahead.
Okay. So on page 3 begins section 2. And you'll note that there are some changes to Title 19, the military title, and then also Title 27, which is the title in the statutes for workforce services. And so we create some new paragraphs, and you'll note that as we go through them, that they are very similar, just referring one to the other, the military department to the Department of Workforce Services, and the Department of Workforce Services to the military department, to refer them to one another. And then there are a couple conforming amendments to in this section. So the first one in Title 19, this creates in the Adjutant General's in the Adjutant General's duties and powers, in subsection B, a new paragraph, so that it indicates that the Adjutant General shall enter into agreements, exchange information, and otherwise assist the Department of Workforce Services to counsel, mediate, investigate, and determine claims by members of the Wyoming National Guard and employees of the military department under the federal laws enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or under 27-9-105, which is the statute in the workforce services that lists these types of grievances as applicable. And the Adjutant General shall promulgate rules that coordinate with the Department of Workforce Services rules that it promulgates to accomplish this. And then and those rules also need to be consistent with all of the federal requirements as well. And then there's, to be clear, on page 4, beginning at line 6, nothing in this paragraph prevents a state employee of the military department claiming to be aggrieved by an employment practice specified as discriminatory or unfair in those workforce services statutes that already exist from filing with the Department of Workforce Services a complaint in accordance with the 27-9-106, which is the statute in workforce services statutes that describes how to make one of these complaints. So then,
So Heather, let me go to the co-chairman real quickly in that regard. Go ahead, co-chairman.
Mr. Chairman, because it's kind of a confusing situation, I would ask Mr. Smith for a little more explanation of the 4 statuses of employees in the military department and how this coordinates with each of those statuses. We've had this discussion before, but I think it's important for all of us to understand the various statuses and how what we're doing applies to those various different statuses.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I'm glad to allow Mr. Smith to interject at this point regarding language on pages 3 and 4. So Mr. Smith, would you like to weigh in on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to Chairman Burkhart's question, so in the report that we gave the committee in November, we talked about how we have various employees. So we have dual status federal employees of both the Army Guard and the Air Guard. We have pure civilian federal employees, which we call Title V employees. Title V is a reference to U.S. code that allows us to have them. And then we have state employees. We actually have a couple of other statuses that aren't really impacted here that are pure military statuses, like people on Title 10 orders, people on Title 32, additional duty or active guard reserve orders. Those are a totally different system. We're really talking about a type of civilian federal employee. What was interesting about drafting this language is in talking with Mr. Wolf, who is on, can answer committee questions about how this all would work. We came to understand that Workforce Services already has an agreement with the EEOC authorized by 29.9.104A that allows them to work with the EEOC already. That's why we're in the Workforce Services arena. Our idea was to allow to have the military department and Workforce Services enter into an agreement and make rules to allow Workforce Services personnel to act as equal employment opportunity counselors, which is part of the EEOC process for federal employees, or EEOC investigators, which is used during the formal complaint process under the EEOC. So essentially, what this bill will end up doing is allowing the military department to utilize Workforce Services state employees to function in those two areas, keeping it out of the military department so there's a more of a degree of independence, and also helps the military department because at this point, we do not have people who can function in those areas given our federal manning. So we have had to go out and hire basically contractors to function as EEOC investigators. We've also had to borrow EO counselors from the Bureau of Land Management, from the Veterans Association, from FE Warren. They have their own jobs to do. We don't have that position in the military department, so we've had to borrow them. So those two things are fixed. The committee's concern and the concern of some of the testimony in November was to ensure that that part of the federal employee discrimination and harassment process was done by an outside agency. This bill would create the ability for Workforce Services to accomplish that. So I don't know if I caught all of the concerns, but that's my first shot at it.
Well, Mr. Smith, I found that to be very helpful. Thank you. Committee, any questions at this point for Mr. Smith? And we will certainly have discussion after the bill is presented and can come back to any of this. So Heather, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, there's a question from Representative Stivar.
Thank you for
Chairman.
that. Representative Stivar.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Smith, will this give the military members an appeal through Workforce Services?
Mr. Smith?
Appeal their complaints?
Chairman Landon, Representative Stivar, it gives Workforce Services basically works the complaints that people file under this. Technically, it doesn't create a whole new complaint system for federal employees. It just interjects Workforce Services into the existing complaint process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And certainly, Mr. Wolf, we will come to you a little bit later on as we finish up presentation on the bill and look forward to your comments as well. Appreciate you being here. But you are certainly welcome, Jason, at any point in time, if you'd like to jump in you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, we'll keep going with Heather and allow you, Heather, to walk on through the bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to point out, I apologize for going backwards, but on page 2, back in that section, I didn't point out specifically lines 15 through 17, where it says that the provisions of that section may be exercised in addition to or in lieu of the applicable procedure in 19-7-103B25, which is the procedure that we just talked about. So before we leave 19B25, I wanted to clarify that newly created UCMJ part was in addition to or instead of this. So there are different reporting options. Okay. So now on middle of page 4, we are at statute 27-9-102. So now we've moved to the workforce services statutes. This is one of the more or less conforming amendments. We go into their definition that they already have in their whole section of the fair employment section. And we go into their definition of employer to just make sure that all aspects of the military department are captured there. You'll see in line 19 and 20, because as Mr. Smith just described, there's several different aspects of the military department as an employer. So then at the bottom of page 4, we now are going into 27-9-104. And this is the part that addresses the powers and duties of the Department of Employment. And so we amend their paragraph 5. I'm on page 5 and amending paragraph 5. Just as we kept discussing this, the several of the additional actions that seem to be a part of this process, this reporting process, they include counseling and mediation. And so that is a conforming amendment to these 2 paragraphs that are added. And now there's a new paragraph 8 starting at line 12. And this is the kind of reciprocal paragraph to what we just saw in the military section. So this allows the Department of Workforce Services to enter into agreements, exchange information, and otherwise assist the Wyoming Military Department to counsel, mediate, investigate, and determine claims by members of the Wyoming National Guard and employees of the military department under this chapter or under the EEOC commission as applicable. And then then it says that this department will promulgate rules that coordinate with the military department rules and that are consistent with and work with the federal requirements. So that's the companion paragraph, the 2 reciprocal ones that refer to one another then in each of their sections. And that finishes page 5. And then going to the top of page 6, this is section 3, that the rules that were authorized in each of those new paragraphs. Now it just describes that not later than July 1st, the military department and the Department of Workforce Services shall each promulgate their rules that are necessary. And then section 4, this is the appropriation and the position. So subsection A, starting at line 8, this is the appropriation that's given to the Department of Workforce Services to cover the salaries and training and the things necessary for this additional position. And then as you turn over to page 7 in subsection B, here's the authorization for the 1 full-time equivalent position for the Workforce Services. And then subsection C, this is the section that many of you will be familiar with in lots of appropriations that indicate that, okay, this was just started, and then in the future, it'll be part of their budget, their standard budget. They shall include it as part of their budget. And then on page 8, the end of the bill is section 5. This is the effective date section. And so it is saying that the rules that need to be promulgated will be effective immediately. And the rules and the appropriation will be effective immediately. And then the actual statutory changes will be effective starting July 1st, once the rules are done.
Heather, thank you. Well done. Committee, questions of Heather? I would like at this time to go to Director Wolf, and then we'll come back to Mr. Smith for any comments you might have, Greg, later. But welcome. Good morning, Mr. Wolf. It's good to have you with us.
Good morning, Chairman Landon, members of the committee. I'm Jason Wolf. I'm the administrator for Workforce Standards. I oversee more of the compliance and regulatory side of Department of Workforce Services. Labor Standards is one of the programs that I oversee. On the line with me, I do have Mr. Jason Delo, who is actually the manager of Labor Standards, kind of my phone a friend, if you will. But I just kind of briefly just would say that, you know, this does fit, this bill does fit within our wheelhouse as it relates to investigation of the discrimination claims that might come out of the military department. This is something that our staff is familiar with and trained in. There's some different nuances as it relates specifically to the federal side of the employees. There's a bit of a different process that carries out, in particular with the EEO counselor process. That is not something that is done specifically on state level type discrimination claims, but that the federal process does require that. So our employees go through a training with the EEOC. There are some specific trainings that this person would need to go through in order to carry out that counseling process that the federal side requires. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I think just I would stand for any questions from the committee.
So, Mr. Wolf, just you really answered the one question that I had, which was, does this bill make sense? And this came out of committee a couple of months ago. A little bit of our concern that maybe we weren't providing all the avenues that we should be with respect to the ability to report. It sounds like you're pretty comfortable with where this statute would take us.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I would say so. And I think I should mention as well that, you know, currently, you know, when we investigate claims of discrimination, we do have a work share agreement with the EEOC where we get, you know, a limited amount of funds back for those investigations and intake procedures.
So committee, I'll certainly go to the committee here in a minute, but just a follow-up question, Mr. Wolf, regarding this position that we will go forth and request. You know how diligent that process is. So is that a position that you can utilize in other ways if we provide that position, you know, to the department and assure that it's going to be there? Can you utilize that position to the fullest?
Mr. Chairman, yes, in discussions with Mr. Smith and Chairman Burkhart, when we kind of were going through the draft of this bill, you know, as I see it playing out, the position that would be allotted to Workforce Services could certainly be cross-utilized, meaning we could give it a small caseload of investigating some state level discrimination claims, but really have this person as a dedicated EEO person for the Fed side of the military, so that they would have availability of this person, you know, at a phone call basically, and that those claims would take priority, you know, over some other state level caseload.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In further answer of your question, because we did address this in our discussions, on page 7 of the bill, lines 8 and 9, where we talk about the full-time position, it talks about to implement the provisions of the agreement for them to do our investigations. And then beginning on the middle of line 8, it says, and to implement the Wyoming Fair Employment Practices Act of '65 as amended. So we added that into the position so that there's no question that if they're not needed by the military department, Mr. Wolf and his folks could still task them with normal discrimination complaints from the state. Because our feeling, our statistical analysis, I'm kind of laughing because the couple of cases we get a number of people coming in to see if they have a discrimination complaint, but we're talking a handful in any given month. Certainly no more than, probably the highest I'm aware of is maybe 10 in a year. We've had as many as 3 active EEO cases in the past. Each one would take a concentrated amount of time for a month or two, and then largely there's nothing to be done for a while because there's certain report requirements. So we didn't think this would justify a full-time position, but with the additional work that Workforce Services could assign to them by writing the statute this way, we felt like it justified the full-time position.
Thank you for that, Mr. Smith. That's helpful. Committee, any questions of Workforce Services, either for Mr. Wolf or Mr. Delo? Any questions of Mr. Smith? Representative Stivar, I can't see you, but Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, let me ask, since it's kind of interesting how the military department would work with Workforce Services. I'm just curious, if there was a discrimination claim that was investigated by Workforce Services and found to be bogus, who would follow up to make sure that employee wouldn't be discriminated against in the military? Would it be the military or Workforce Services? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Wolf.
Chairman Landon, Senator Furphy, I think it would probably be the military department would be my assumption. What we would do after the investigation, if we found the complaint didn't have any merit, is we would issue a determination, a written determination that then could, go through the normal appeal process, which might involve taking that to the federal district court level. If before that, I think it would be on the military department to ensure that there was no retaliation taken for somebody filing a complaint.
So Senator Furphy, follow up. We'll go to Mr. Smith. Any thoughts you have for Senator Furphy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Furphy. Your question's a good one. Under federal law currently, we have to follow the EEOC's rules for discrimination complaints. Once we were to receive the determination or investigation from Mr. Wolf's office, we have to then serve it, give it to the complainant. The complainant then has a certain number of days to digest that and tell us what they want to do. They can either ask for a hearing in front of an administrative judge of the EEOC, or they can ask the military department to do a final agency action. For us to tell them based on the investigation what we're willing to do. If they don't like what we're willing to do, they also can ask for a hearing from the EEOC. So essentially for a discrimination case, the existing EEOC federal process that we have to, since December of 16, we have to follow, would take care of those claims. If someone believed they were reprised for bringing such a claim, that is another complaint that they can file with the EEOC. So it would kick off another investigation against the agency. Additionally, if it's a reprisal complaint, they also can, there's many avenues in the military. They can go to the Inspector General, they can file a congressional, they could do one of these complaint of wrongs in Section 1. There's a number of ways they can complain that they're being reprised against.
So, Mr. Smith, I'll go to Representative Henderson here in a second, but it feels like to me that you and Mr. Wolf feel pretty confident that there would be a coordinated effort, that there would be communication between the two agencies to make sure everything's followed up on. I sense that that's where Senator Furphy was going too. There's got to be some coordination and some communication, correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and that's why we established back on page 2, I think it is, we said that the Adjutant General shall enter into agreements with Workforce Services, and we shall promulgate rules. So we can't ignore this. We have to do it, and we put it into rules so that we would have enough flexibility to figure out if the way we're interoperating works or not, rather than putting it in statute. Certainly, this committee can ask us how it's going next session once we start this process, if the bill passes. And we would certainly most likely report that as part of our annual report on sexual harassment. We would discuss how those cases are being handled. So we think the bill gives us enough flexibility to work out any kinks, but because Workforce Services already does this kind of thing for state employees, we really think it should be pretty easy to make this work.
Thank you for that. Committee, anything else for Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm good with the, with the merits of this position and support the position. My question goes to page 7, line 11. At the end there, we're putting an end to the authorization. Could you help with a little more information on the reasoning behind that? And so what happens after June of 24? And could this be perhaps a contract position?
Co-Chairman Burkhart, I'm looking at you on the screen, wondering if you'd like to comment on that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Jarvis had her hand up, so I'll let her comment first.
Okay, Heather, you were
Mr. Chairman.
up with this anyway. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the position and the funding for that would not, and it's just they are inserted through this bill, and then that's what the subsection C indicates, is that in the future, as they progress, then that they would the Workforce Services would just include this as part of their standard budget, so it doesn't have to be renewed like as if it's a new thing. It's then just like they have however many employees now, then they would have however many employees plus this one in their future as they move forward. So that date of June 30th, 2024, that's how the mechanism of it was done to add this new person.
So Representative Henderson, I hope that helps. I think paragraph C takes care of henceforth and heretofore after the date of 2024. This bill simply says we're not going to just authorize this through 22. We want it to go through the next biennium, and then it will be included in the standard budget. Does that make sense? Any follow-up, Representative Henderson? You're muted, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Makes a lot of sense. The other question I had with regard to, could this be a contract position?
So I would look probably to Mr. Wolf on that one. What are your thoughts, Jason?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Landon. Representative Henderson. I don't see any issue federally with it not being a merited position. My only caution on that would be similar to probably what the military department has experienced, is a high turnover with a contract type employee. Training these people up, it's fairly time intensive to be a proficient investigator, and I would just urge some caution on the amount of turnover that we see already in some contract positions. So
okay,
that's good. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm having a hard time justifying this exposition in my mind. I'm thinking that this kind of investigation is already in the Workforce Services wheelhouse, and maybe I'm mistaken that is something they deal with on a regular basis and would have personnel that could do that. But could Mr. Wolf enlighten me on this?
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
Yep, Senator Anderson, thank you for the question. I think that if 2020 hadn't hit us, I would agree with you completely. What happened when we went through the budget cuts in 2020, was we reallocated 3 positions out of this unit, which is 100% generally funded, with the exception of the funds that we get through our EEOC contract, which amounts to about $80,000 to $100,000 a year. So it's not much, but it is something. Currently, what we process on an annual basis in this unit is we do about 170 fair employment claims annually. Those, while may not sound like a lot, those investigations tend to be fairly onerous, taking approximately about 168 hours of staff time per investigation and roughly about 160 days to work a case from beginning to end. So we also in this unit handle wage claims. So if a person feels like they haven't been paid correctly by their employer, they can file a wage claim with this unit. We also process around 400 of those annually. So currently we have 6 compliance investigators to work that existing caseload. So, you know, if this were to be taken on through the military department, and we would really have this person as kind of a dedicated person for them, although we would cross-utilize it, I do feel, given the current workload and where we're at, that we would need the position.
Okay, Senator Anderson, any follow-up? Okay, committee, further questions? We're working 0302, working draft 0.8, military department discrimination or harassment grievances. Anything further for the good folks who have walked us through the bill? Okay, Heather, I want to ask if you are aware of anyone either in the room or online who would like to comment as we will go to public comment on this.
Mr. Chairman, there is nobody in the room and there is nobody in the queue online.
Okay, thank you for that. Committee, further discussion? Any discussion on this bill? Okay, committee, what's your pleasure?
Move approval.
Okay, moved by Senator Furphy. Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Brown. Committee, any discussion before we work this page by page? Okay, let's go to page 1. We'll walk all the way through this bill to give time. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Anything on page 5? Pages 6 and 7. And finally on page 8. Okay. If there's nothing further, I sense that we're ready to vote. Heather, would you take roll on 302 working draft 0.8?
Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
Excused?
Senator Landon,
Aye.
Representative Baker,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Burt,
Aye.
Representative Henderson,
Aye.
Representative McGuire,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Burkhart,
Aye.
Okay. I was waiting the tabulation, but I do believe that bill has passed. Mr. Co-Chairman, what's your sense of which direction this one ought to go?
Mr. Chairman, I was thinking I have a lot of support on the House side from people with a military background in that, and I think the House can take this one.
Okay, let's 302 will be a House bill when we get there next month. Committee, I'm inclined to keep charging. If you need to take a break, please feel free to do that, but I think I'd like to move on to 299 working draft point 5. So we can get on through our work this morning. If there's no violent objection to that. Okay, let's go to that. Let's go to that bill. And Heather, would you walk us through 299 working draft point 5, criminal record dissemination military department?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So this bill draft, it authorizes, this actually goes into Title VII, which is the criminal procedure section of the Wyoming statutes. And in Title VII, this particular area, Chapter 19 of Title VII is about criminal history records. And many of you are most likely familiar with with different boards or commissions or agencies who the legislature goes in and says they can be released information, or applicants need to go submit for fingerprints. This is the section. I'm just orienting you of where you all have seen this section. So at the bottom of page 1, and the military department is already authorized to receive criminal record history. This is just authorizing making it be a bit more clear so that they can actually, kind of make decisions according to make different decisions according to what they find. And it's not only for applicants. It's, someone could already be in the military department, for example. So if you turn to the top of page 2, the first section that is amended is 7-19-106. And this is about access to and dissemination of information. And so this is talking about the criminal history record information and about it being disseminated. And we go down to the existing paragraph 15 in subsection A. So the military department, for purposes of this record information can be given to the military department for purposes of obtaining criminal history record information, including any completed investigations. That was one of the things that the committee had discussed, that as they make different decisions, it's important to know if someone's being investigated. And that when I say different decisions, that's actually at the tail end of this, starting at line, well, we'll just look at the whole rest of this. For prospective employees or for military members who are serving on active duty or in the Wyoming National Guard, and that this information that's authorized by this paragraph, it shall only be given if it's required by a department as a condition for employment or for a training, a deployment, mobilization, or security clearance, some sort of a decision in one of those areas. So it's not just giving complete free rein. It's saying, if it's required for one of those decisions, then this type of information can be given. And then the next section is 7-19-201, beginning at the bottom of page 2 and moving to the top of page 3. And this is saying that the following persons shall be required to submit for fingerprinting. And this corresponds to in those same situations where the military department might need the information for an employment or a training or deployment or mobilization decision, then those folks, either a prospective employee or a volunteer or someone who's on active duty, would need to go give their fingerprints so that the information could be disseminated. And that is the bill.
Okay, Heather, thank you. Committee questions of Heather before we go to Mr. Smith. Any questions of Heather? Okay, Mr. Smith, anxious to get your perspective on this bill. I noticed some qualifiers in there, and I know that you'll get to that, but please take it away. I'm interested in your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill really addresses a problem that we've discussed with the committee over the years. In fact, back at, I think it was the 2018 legislative session, we had a bill, Senate File 32, which essentially did this very same thing. It passed the Senate and it died in the House. If, as I recall, the House discussion was largely centered in to a feeling that we just wanted this information to hurt our people. The problem has been that we need the information about particularly completed criminal investigations because it has to do with your security clearance. It has to do with whether or not we have to flag you on the Army side, which basically means you're under investigation. We got to hold you and not deploy you and send you out of the state for training. So this really addresses a need we've always had. Currently, we have been able to work with the county and district attorneys, as well as the various criminal law agencies in the state. We usually are able to get this information currently, but it really, we have this statute in 719 tells the law enforcement agencies who they can give the information to. So we've been able to get the information for the most part in the past by telling them why we need it. This will make it easier for those criminal law enforcement agencies to give it to us because it authorizes them. They're kind of out on the limb when they give it to us now. When somebody is under investigation, we try very hard not to allow them to go out of the state while they're being investigated. If we can't get the information, we have a hard time figuring out when we do that. Security clearances is very definitely another big problem. We have had completed criminal investigations that have, I'll use the word languished at the prosecuting attorney's offices for literally years. And yet we as a military department by federal law must make a security clearance decision. And yet we don't know what's going on with those cases. So again, that would help us in that regard. So really, this is a big help to us. It helps our Wyoming law enforcement agencies be authorized to cooperate with us without feeling like we're somehow going around the law. So with that, I'll stand for the committee's question.
So, Mr. Smith, I mentioned those qualifiers. You do rein this in the suggested language. You go to line 15 on page 2. You know, it's not like we're just carte blanche allowing you to seek the records of just anyone. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's correct. And we did that really in trying to address some of the concerns expressed back in 18 on Senate File 32.
Right.
This language is similar to what was in that bill, but we just wanted to tighten it up a little bit so that anyone who is concerned we're just digging up dirt on our people would know we're only doing it for these specific federal military requirements that we have to meet. And also, I just have to throw out there, as General Porter always says, our people are our big priority. Strength is our #1 priority in the military department. If we don't have fully manned units, we can't meet the needs of the federal government or our state. We really don't want to get rid of our people. We really don't want to hurt our people. We want to keep them. And one of the ways we can keep them is if we're fully aware of what criminal investigations have said about them, so that we're not just holding people in kind of a stasis while we wait for prosecutors to decide whether to take the case. So I just had to throw that in there because we really are not trying to get rid of our people.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Well stated. Committee questions of either Heather or Mr. Smith this morning on, we're working 299, working draft 0.5. Any questions on this bill? Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Heather, thank you. Appreciate it. I will ask again, there being no questions, let's go to public comment on 299. If there's anyone who has showed up there in the Capitol today, Heather, or if there's anybody online.
Mr. Chairman, there's nobody here in the Capitol room.
Okay.
And there's nobody online.
I see no one, and thank you for verifying that. Okay, we'll close public comment. on 299. Discussion on this bill, committee. Okay. What is your pleasure, committee, on this bill?
Bill.
Okay, moved by Representative Brown. Seconded by Representative O'Hearn. Let's work the bill. Sensing that there's not much discussion to be had. Let's go to page 1. Anything on page 1? Any proposed amendments or discussion on page 2? How about page 3? Okay. Committee, sensing no further discussion, let's go to a vote on 299 working draft point 5. Heather, if you would take roll.
Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator McEwen,
Aye.
Senator Pappas,
Excused.
Representative Baker,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Burt,
Aye.
Representative Henderson,
Aye.
Representative McGuire,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Stivar,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Burkhart,
Aye.
Chairman Landon.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, that passes.
Thank you, Heather. That will be a Senate bill. 299 will send to the Senate side if that meets with the approval of the co-chairman.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Well, committee, that wraps up work that we were to do this morning. I want to go to the co-chairman as we have now finished our interim work. So any comments for the good of the cause or any visions for the future, Mr. Co-Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I'd like to say is just thank you for the committee being here today for the extra part day meeting, and really a thank you to those who, for a variety of reasons, couldn't make the November meeting. It's obvious they did their homework prior to this meeting, and I'd just like to say a sincere thank you for doing that. It really helps the meeting move along and shows your dedication. So thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman, that touches on a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. And one is congratulations to Representative Brown. My golly, that wasn't a very good meeting date the last time around. And it's good to have you back on board, Representative. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
All righty. Committee, just a couple of heartfelt things again as we close out today. I really want to thank the general and his staff for the extra work that went into not only the report that came to us at the end of the interim, but all the effort to get us to today. And I think we have a couple of bills that will play well and hopefully be of help to you, General. Really appreciate you being here. And by the way, if you have any comments today, please jump in here.
Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee, Heather, I think I'm just going to echo everybody's thanks in terms of working through some pretty difficult issues and trying to support the military department, and more importantly, the people that are within the military department, to make sure that that they're taken care of, and that we continue to do the right thing. But it's a wicked problem. I thank everybody for their common sense, for their effort, for their time, and appreciate the continued support from this committee. That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
General, I hope you'll pass along our thanks to everyone in your department, and we look forward to working with you going forward. Committee, we did some good work this interim. Mr. Co-Chairman, jump in, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just wanted to recognize too is Heather Jarvis and that for the work she did on this. Took some just ideas, concepts, and turned them into good workable bills, and then worked those bills. I don't know how many meetings there were to get them in the form they're in now. Just thanks, Heather. This was additional work that wasn't contemplated for the interim.
And the co-chairman took the words right out of my mouth too on that, Heather. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to compliment the co-chairs and the Heathers for a great job with this committee this year. It all went smoothly. We got our work done in time, and I think it's worthy of an applause. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Chairman Anderson. Thank you. And I know you've got work to do later in the week with the committee that you chair, and we wish you good luck on that. Committee, what I was going to say to finish up today is just how much I've appreciated the opportunity to work with all of you. This is a committee that I thought really came together and shared good ideas and good intentions throughout the interim. We've got several bills, and the co-chairman pointed out at the beginning of the morning that we're going to have our hands full. And so we will be listening carefully to everything that you tell us. But as co-chairman, we're going to have to try to decide how many of those bills we can get out onto the floor for consideration by our colleagues. With redistricting and a very important budget. This next month is going to be at a fever pitch. So thank you for all your work during the interim. I know that work will continue as we get into next month. Jump in, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the committee, we may have to prioritize bills. So if there is a bill that you feel very strongly about, that we may not be able to get to, and you would like to take it as a personal bill, if we can't, please let the chairman and I know, and Heather also, so that we can plan for those. I'm not saying that you should just take them and run with them, but we may, like I said, we may have to prioritize the bills. I believe, Heather, how many bills do we have right now?
Mr. Chairman, there are currently 14 numbered bills, one waiting for a fiscal note and the 3 today. So there will be a total of 18 sponsored by this committee.
Okay, I thank you, Heather. I really don't think that all of those bills will get through to be considered during a 20-day session. In fact, I would say more likely than not, I would say probably half or less. So just give that some thought. If you have some thoughts you'd like to discuss with the chairman and I, let us know. Because I figured that on the House side, we have 8 meetings, with 5 of those being our original House bills and 3 being Senate files after they cross over. It doesn't leave us much time to consider any other bills or personal bills. So just give all of that some thought. If we're condensing this session to 20 days, we may need to make some decisions on how bills go forward.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. And just, boy, anything you can do to give a little bit more time to those Senate bills coming over, we sure appreciate that.
Oh, we just dropped to 2 days for Senate bills.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Committee, anything else for the good of the cause? I really want to thank our staff. Thank you for everything, Heather's, and please thank your colleagues in the LSO office. It's been a hard year of work. We look forward to next month. Can't wait to see you all in person. Thanks for being here this morning. We are adjourned.
Thank you.